The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Mitchell's General Store, and Mabel Whitaker knew, even before the door opened, that Red Hollow, Wyoming was going to hate her on sight. She'd felt it in every town between Philadelphia and here. That particular quality of silence when she stepped down from a coach. The way conversations paused mid-sentence. How women's eyes traveled from her face to her body and back again, calculating, measuring, finding her wanting. The door swung open. January wind hit her like a fist. "You getting out or what?" The driver's voice carried that edge of impatience she'd learned to recognize. The edge that said, "You're taking up space. You're slowing us down. You're inconvenient in a way that thinner women aren't." Mabel gathered her carpetbag and stepped down into the frozen mud of Main Street. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. One church, two saloons, a row of weathered storefronts that looked like they were barely holding on against the Wyoming wind. Mountains rose in the distance, sharp and white against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. 3 women stood outside the general store, bundled in coats that actually fit them properly. Their conversation died the second Mabel's boots hit the ground. "Lord have mercy," one of them said. Not quietly enough. The other 2 laughed. Small, cruel sounds that traveled in the cold air. Mabel's face burned. She kept her chin up and pretended she hadn't heard, which was what she always did, what she'd been doing since she was 12 years old and her mother first said, "You've got such a pretty face, dear. If only, if only, if only, if only." The words that had followed her across half a continent. "You Miss Whitaker?" A man emerged from the general store. 50s, weathered face, the kind of belly that suggested he'd never missed a meal in his life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Fat men were jolly. Fat women were tragic. "Yes, sir." "Name's Mitchell. Got a telegram from Mercer saying you'd be on this coach." He looked her up and down, not bothering to hide his assessment. "You the cook he hired?" "Cook and bookkeeper." Mitchell's eyebrows went up. "Bookkeeper? I have experience with accounts and ledgers, yes." "Huh." He scratched his jaw. "Well, Mercer's man is supposed to collect you. Should be here." He paused, looking past her shoulder. "There he is now." A wagon was coming up the street. Not fancy, just a working ranch wagon with mud-splattered wheels and a bed full of supplies covered in canvas. The driver was young, maybe 20, with the kind of sunburned face that spoke of long days outdoors. He pulled the horses to a stop and jumped down, landing with the easy grace of someone who'd been doing physical labor his whole life. "Miss Whitaker?" He pulled off his hat. At least he had manners. "Name's Tommy Reed. Mr. Mercer sent me to fetch you out to Iron Creek." "Thank you." Tommy grabbed her carpetbag before she could protest, then turned to help her up into the wagon seat. His hands were careful, impersonal, professional, but she saw it anyway, that flicker of surprise when he took her weight, that tiny adjustment in his stance. Everyone noticed. Everyone always noticed. "It's about an hour's ride," Tommy said once they were moving. "Road's not too bad today. Froze solid last night." "I appreciate you coming to get me." "Yes, ma'am." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You ever worked on a ranch before?" "No." "Ever been out west before?" "No." Another pause. "It's different out here. Harder than back east, especially for—" He trailed off. "Especially for women?" Mabel supplied. "Yeah, that." But she knew what he'd really meant, especially for women like you. Women who don't fit the narrow definition of what the frontier considers acceptable. They rode in silence for a while. The town fell away behind them, replaced by endless stretches of snow-covered grassland. The mountains grew larger on the horizon. The cold seeped through Mabel's coat, the warmest one she owned, which apparently wasn't warm enough for Wyoming in January. "Can I ask you something?" Tommy said finally. "Go ahead." "Why'd you take this job? I mean," he stumbled over his words. "Not that it's my business or nothing, but Iron Creek's been struggling. Mr. Mercer's been through 4 cooks in 2 years. Ranch hands are grumpy as hell when the food's bad. And the bookkeeping's a mess since old Henry died last spring. It ain't exactly a prize position." Mabel considered how much truth to offer this stranger. Not much, she decided. "I needed work. Mr. Mercer offered work. It seemed straightforward. But you came all the way from Philadelphia." "I did." "That's a long way to come for a job cooking beans." "Yes," Mabel said quietly. "It is." What she didn't say, It's a long way to come to escape a fiancé who left you at the altar because his friends convinced him he could do better. It's a long way to come to escape the creditors who showed up after Richard disappeared, informing you that your fiancé had been spending money he didn't have, and he'd put your name on the debts. It's a long way to come when you're 26 years old and realize that everything you thought your life would be was a lie. Tommy didn't push for more details. They rode in silence, the wagon wheels crunching over frozen ground. An hour later, they crested a rise, and Tommy pointed. There, that's Iron Creek. The ranch sprawled across a valley, a collection of buildings clustered around a large main house. Barns, corrals, a bunkhouse. Everything looked weathered but functional, the kind of place that had been there for decades and would be there for decades more if someone fought hard enough to keep it. Smoke rose from the main house chimney. Cattle dotted the distant fields, dark shapes against white snow. We run about 800 head, Tommy said, following her gaze. Used to be twice that before the winter of '82. Lost a lot of stock that year. Mr. Mercer's been rebuilding since. They rolled down into the valley. As they got closer, Mabel could see men working near the barns, carrying hay, mending fence, the kind of endless labor that kept a ranch running. Several of them stopped to watch the wagon approach. "That's the new cook?" one of them called out. His voice carried clearly in the cold air. Someone else laughed. "Looks like she won't miss any meals." Mabel's hands clenched in her lap. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Tommy's jaw tightened. "Shut your damn mouth, Jackson." But the damage was done. The laughter followed them all the way to the main house. Tommy pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, grabbing Mabel's bag. "Don't pay them no mind," he said quietly. "Ranch hands got nothing better to do than run their mouths. They'll quit once the novelty wears off." Mabel had heard that before. They'll quit. They'll stop. They'll get bored. They never did. The main house door opened and a woman emerged, tall, rail-thin, somewhere in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a dark dress and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "You must be Miss Whitaker. I'm Mrs. Chen. I run this household." Her voice was crisp, efficient. "Mr. Mercer is out checking fence lines. He'll be back before supper. Come inside. Tommy, bring her bag to the small room off the kitchen." Mabel followed Mrs. Chen into the house. The interior was warmer but spare, functional rather than comfortable. Wooden floors, simple furniture, everything clean but worn. "Kitchen's through here." Mrs. Chen led her through a dining room with a long table that could seat a dozen men. "We feed the hands 3 times a day, breakfast at 5, lunch at noon, supper at 6. You'll be cooking for 12 to 15 men, depending on the season. More during roundup and branding." The kitchen was larger than Mabel expected. A massive cast iron stove, shelves of supplies, a work table scarred from years of use. A window looked out over the yard. "Your room's here." Mrs. Chen opened a door off the kitchen. The room was small, barely space for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but it had a window, and it was private. That was more than Mabel had hoped for. "Supper's in 2 hours," Mrs. Chen said. "I've got stew on the stove, but you'll take over tomorrow. Breakfast is your responsibility. The men eat a lot. Don't be stingy with portions or they'll complain. The pantry's stocked, but you'll need to keep inventory. Mr. Mercer handles orders from town once a week." "And the bookkeeping?" Mrs. Chen's expression shifted slightly. "That's done in Mr. Mercer's office. He'll discuss that with you separately. For now, focus on the cooking. These men work hard. They expect good food." No pressure, Mabel thought. Just feed 15 hungry cowboys 3 times a day while learning an entirely new job in an entirely new place where everyone's already decided you're going to fail. She unpacked her bag, which didn't take long since she didn't own much, and changed into her work dress. Simpler fabric, looser fit, easier to move in. She tied on an apron and went to examine the kitchen properly. The stove needed cleaning. The pantry was disorganized, flour and sugar mixed in with tools and rags. The inventory system, such as it was, seemed to be remember where you put things and hope for the best. Mabel rolled up her sleeves. She'd learned young that when people expected you to fail, the only option was to prove them wrong through sheer competence. You couldn't change their minds about your appearance, but you could make yourself so valuable they couldn't afford to lose you. By the time Mrs. Chen came to check on her, Mabel had reorganized 3 shelves and made a list of supplies that were running low. Mrs. Chen looked at the list, then at the shelves, then at Mabel. "You work fast." "I don't like wasting time." Something that might have been approval crossed the older woman's face. "The men will be in from the field soon. Best set the table." Mabel had just finished laying out plates and utensils when she heard boots on the porch, heavy footsteps, multiple men talking and laughing. The door opened and they flooded in, ranch hands peeling off coats and hats, bringing the smell of horses and cold air and honest work. They were young, mostly. A few older men mixed in, all of them stopping mid-conversation when they saw her. "Boys, this is Miss Whitaker," Mrs. Chen announced. "She's the new cook. You'll treat her with respect, or you'll answer to Mr. Mercer." The men mumbled greetings. Mabel could feel their eyes on her, measuring, judging. She kept her expression neutral and started bringing out bowls of stew. "Smells good," one of the older hands said. He had kind eyes. "Bill Hutchins, ma'am. I'm the foreman." "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hutchins." The men filled the table, passing bread, spooning stew into bowls. The conversation picked up again, talk of fence repairs and feed supplies, and whether the weather would hold. Then the door opened again. The room went quiet. Mabel looked up from the pot she was ladling from, and her breath caught. The man in the doorway was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of presence that seemed to take up more space than his physical body occupied. He was maybe 35, with dark hair, a rough beard, and eyes so light blue they looked almost colorless in the lamplight. This, Mabel realized, was Colt Mercer. He pulled off his hat and hung it by the door. His gaze swept the room, cataloging everything, missing nothing. When his eyes landed on Mabel, they stopped. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. "Miss Whitaker," he said finally. His voice was deep, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. "You made it." "Yes, sir." "Any trouble on the road?" "No, sir." He nodded once and moved to the head of the table. The ranch hands shifted to make room, the hierarchy of the ranch asserting itself without anyone saying a word. Mabel served him stew, Mrs. Chen's stew, not hers, though she'd be judged for it anyway, and returned to the kitchen. Through the doorway, she could hear the dinner conversation resume. Someone mentioned a broken water pump. Someone else complained about coyotes near the north pasture. Colt's voice rumbled responses, giving orders, making decisions. Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow. "That went well enough." "Did it? You didn't faint, cry, or run away. That puts you ahead of the last 2 cooks we hired." The older woman picked up a dish towel. "Mr. Mercer wants to see you in his office after dinner regarding the bookkeeping position." Mabel's stomach nodded. "All right." The men finished eating and filed out, offering awkward thanks. Mabel and Mrs. Chen cleaned up in efficient silence. Then Mrs. Chen pointed down a hallway. "Office is the last door on the left. Knock before you enter." The hallway was dark, lit only by a single lamp on a side table. Mabel found the door and knocked. "Come in." Colt's office was small and cluttered, a desk covered in papers, shelves lined with ledgers and books, a map of the ranch on one wall. He'd taken off his coat. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scars. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit." Mabel sat. Colt studied her for a moment, those pale eyes unreadable. Then he said, "I'm going to be direct with you, Miss Whitaker, because I don't have time for games. This ranch is failing, not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, like bleeding out from a wound you can't find." He pulled a ledger from the mess on his desk and opened it. "These are my accounts, or what passes for accounts. Henry, the man who kept my books before, was loyal but half-blind and not particularly good with numbers even when he could see. He died 6 months ago. Since then, I've been trying to manage it myself." He pushed the ledger toward her. "And I'm worse at it than Henry was." Mabel opened the book. Her eyes widened. It wasn't just disorganized, it was chaos. Entries without dates, expenses without categories, numbers that didn't add up. Entire pages scratched out and rewritten. "I can see why you're having trouble," she said carefully. "Can you fix it?" She flipped through more pages. "I can try, but it's going to take time to untangle. And I'll need to understand how the ranch operates, what your regular expenses are, your revenue streams, I'll teach you the ranch operations. You teach me how to read these damn numbers without wanting to shoot something. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the knowledge that this job was probably more than she could handle, Mabel almost smiled. That seems fair. Colt leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Chen says you've already reorganized the pantry. Just the beginning. There's more to do. You always work that fast? When I care about doing something right, yes. Good. He closed his ledger. Here's what I need from you, Miss Whitaker. I need someone who can cook food that doesn't poison my men or send them running to the bunkhouse complaining. I need someone who can make sense of these books and tell me where my money's actually going. And I need someone who won't quit the first time it gets hard. Because it will get hard. This ranch is hanging on by its fingernails, and I'm running out of fingers to hold on with. His honesty was startling. Most employers would have hidden the truth, let her discover the problem slowly. But Colt Mercer laid it out flat. This is bad, and it might get worse, and you need to know that before you commit. Why did you hire me? Mabel asked. The question came out before she could stop it. You got my letter. You knew? She gestured vaguely at herself. I knew you were a woman applying for a cook position, Colt said. That's all I needed to know. You wrote that you had experience managing household accounts and preparing meals for large groups. That was more qualified than half the people I interviewed in person. But, Miss Whitaker, his voice was flat, I'm not going to pretend the world is kinder than it is. You've probably noticed people judging you based on your appearance. I've noticed people judging me based on mine. I'm too quiet, too angry looking, too willing to solve problems with my fists instead of words. People cross the street when they see me coming. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark yard. I don't have the luxury of hiring people based on whether they fit some picture in my head of what they should look like. I need people who can do the work. That's all. Can you do the work? Mabel thought about the journey that had brought her here. The debts. The betrayal. The long train rides and stagecoach trips with people staring, whispering, judging. She thought about Philadelphia, where she'd never have another chance at respectability, where every door was closed before she even knocked. Yes, she said. I can do the work? Then that's all that matters. He turned back to face her. In the lamplight, his features looked harsh, all sharp angles and old scars, but his eyes were steady, honest. We start fresh tomorrow, he said. Breakfast at 5. After breakfast, I'll show you around the ranch properly. After lunch, we'll tackle those ledgers together. Fair? Fair. One more thing. He moved back to his desk, picked up a piece of paper, handed it to her. Your wages. First payment is due end of this week. After that, twice a month. Room and board included. If you need anything from town, personal supplies, whatever, let me know and I'll add it to the weekly order. Mabel looked at the number written on the paper. It was more than she'd expected, significantly more. This seems... You're doing 2 jobs, Colt said. You get paid for 2 jobs. I don't cheat my employees. The kindness of it, the basic decency, made her throat tight. She'd gotten so used to being shortchanged, overlooked, underpaid, the assumption that she should be grateful for whatever scraps were offered. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Colt, he said. Everyone calls me Colt. Then you should call me Mabel. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or the beginning of respect. All right, Mabel. Welcome to Iron Creek Ranch. The first breakfast was a disaster. Not because the food was bad. Mabel's biscuits were actually lighter than what the men were used to, and her gravy was rich without being greasy, but because she'd misjudged the quantities. Badly. She'd cooked for large groups before, but she'd cooked for city families, for church socials, for people who had other meals to look forward to. Ranch hands were different. They worked 12-hour days in brutal cold. They burned calories like wood in a stove, and they ate accordingly. By the time the last man sat down, the food was gone. 2 of the younger hands went to the fields hungry. Mabel caught the looks, the muttered comments, the way Bill Hutchins, the foreman, carefully didn't say anything even though she knew he'd noticed. Tomorrow, she told him quietly. Tomorrow I'll make more. Yes, ma'am. His voice was kind. You'll get the hang of it. But the damage was done. Word spread that the new cook couldn't even get breakfast right. By lunch, she'd heard 3 different versions of the story, each one making her sound more incompetent than the last. She doubled the lunch portions. Then she waited, anxious, while the men ate. "This is good," one of them said finally. Jackson, the one who'd made the comment when she'd arrived. He didn't sound happy about admitting it. "Damn sight better than what we've been getting," another agreed. Mabel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That afternoon, she and Colt sat in his office with the ledgers spread between them. She'd spent the morning between meals trying to make sense of the accounts, and the more she looked, the worse it got. "You're being robbed," she said bluntly. Colt looked up from the supply list he was reviewing. "What?" "Look." She turned the ledger around, pointed to a series of entries. "These are your feed purchases from the supplier in town. Mitchell's General Store, right?" "Right." "You're paying 52 cents per hundredweight for hay. The going rate is 40 cents. "How do you know the going rate?" "I asked Mrs. Chen. She asked Tommy. Tommy asked some of the other hands." Mabel flipped to another page. "And here, your grain purchases. You're paying premium prices for standard feed. And these tool orders, you're being charged for items that I'm guessing never arrived." Colt's expression darkened. He leaned forward, studying the numbers. "Son of a bitch." "It's not just Mitchell," Mabel continued. "Someone's been skimming from your payroll, small amounts, $1 here, $2 there. Over the course of a year, it adds up to—" She did quick math in her head. "Maybe $300, possibly more." "Henry," Colt said quietly. "He handled payroll. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just telling you what the numbers show." Colt stood up, paced to the window. His jaw was tight. "Henry was loyal. He worked this ranch for 20 years. Loyal people can still make mistakes. Or someone could have been taking advantage of the fact that his eyesight was failing." Mabel closed the ledger. "Either way, it needs to stop." "What do you suggest?" "For the supplier problems, confront Mitchell. Get your prices fixed or find a new supplier. For the payroll, I'll take that over. I'll handle all money going in and out of this ranch. You just sign off on what I tell you to sign off on." Colt turned to look at her. "You've been here 3 days." "Yes." "And you've already found problems that have been bleeding me dry for months." "That's what you hired me for." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. It was a rough sound, like he was out of practice. "Yeah, I guess it is." The next day, Colt rode into town with the ledgers. He came back 3 hours later, his expression grim but satisfied. "Mitchell claims it was an honest mistake," he said, finding Mabel in the kitchen where she was preparing dinner. "His clerk was new. Didn't know the proper rates. He's adjusting our account and giving us credit for the overcharges." "Do you believe him?" "No, but I also can't prove he was doing it deliberately, and I need him more than he needs me right now, so I'll accept the excuse and watch him like a hawk going forward." "Fair enough." Colt pulled out a chair, sat at the kitchen table. He looked tired. "You made me look like a fool." Mabel's heart sank. "I didn't mean—" "I'm not angry." He held up a hand. "I'm stating a fact. I walked into Mitchell's store and admitted I'd been paying too much for supplies because I'm too damn stubborn to ask for help with things I don't understand. That's humiliating." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He met her eyes. "You did exactly what I hired you to do, and you probably just saved this ranch from going under, so thank you." The gratitude in his voice was genuine. Mabel felt heat rise in her face. "You're welcome." "The men are talking about you," Colt said after a moment. Her stomach dropped. "What are they saying?" "That you're smart. That the food's gotten better. That you notice things." He paused. "Also, that you reorganized the entire pantry in one afternoon and shamed them all for living like animals." "I didn't—" "Mrs. Chen's words, not mine." He almost smiled. "But she's not wrong. This place was falling apart in small ways. You're putting it back together." By the end of the first week, Mabel had established a routine. Up at 4:30, start the stove, get breakfast cooking, biscuits, gravy, bacon, eggs, fried potatoes. Enough to feed an army. The men came in at 5 like clockwork. They ate quickly, efficiently, the way people eat when food is fuel rather than entertainment. They thanked her, some shyly, some awkwardly, some not at all. After breakfast, she'd clean the kitchen, take inventory, make lists. Then she'd spend an hour or two in Colt's office, untangling the mess of his accounts. Lunch at noon, more simple food, stews, soups, sandwiches, things that stuck to the ribs. Afternoons were for baking bread, preparing dinner, and continuing the endless battle to bring order to the ranch's finances. Dinner at 6. The biggest meal of the day. Roasts, potatoes, vegetables from the root cellar. Pies when she had time. After dinner, more cleaning, more organizing, more planning for the next day. By the time she fell into bed each night, she was exhausted. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from work that mattered. On Sunday, her first day off, she slept until 7, a luxury, and then spent the morning doing laundry and mending her spare dress. Mrs. Chen found her in the kitchen after lunch. "You're not required to work today." "I know, but I don't have anywhere else to be." The older woman studied her. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Mabel kept her eyes on her mending. "Isn't everyone out here?" "Most of them are running from the law or bad debts. You don't strike me as either." "Bad debts," Mabel said quietly. "Not the law? Man trouble? Is it always man trouble?" "Usually." Mrs. Chen sat down across from her. "You don't have to tell me, but you should know, this is a good place for starting over. Mr. Mercer doesn't care about your past. The men will gossip for a few weeks and then lose interest. And if you can keep doing what you've been doing, you'll have more security here than most women ever get." "What about the town?" Mabel asked. "The women at the general store didn't exactly welcome me with open arms." "The town women are idiots." Mrs. Chen's voice was flat. "They've got nothing better to do than judge each other for perceived failings. Ignore them." Easy to say. Not easy at all, but necessary. The older woman stood. "You've got more spine than the last 5 cooks combined. Don't waste it worrying about what a bunch of bored ranch wives think." That evening, Mabel walked out to the barn to clear her head. The sun was setting, painting the snow gold and pink. It was beautiful in a harsh way, like everything else out here. She heard voices from inside the barn, men talking, the low rumble of conversation. She was about to turn away when she caught her own name. "Can't believe Mercer hired her." "Why not? Food's better, kitchen's cleaner, she's doing the job." "Yeah, but look at her, she's huge." "So, what's that got to do with cooking?" "It's just, I don't know. It's weird, having a woman that size around." "You saying you'd prefer going back to Bill's terrible stew?" Laughter, then, "No, I guess not. She's just different." "Different how?" "Just different." Mabel turned and walked back to the house. Her eyes stung. She told herself it was just the cold wind. Different, always different. Never quite right. Never quite fitting into the space the world had decided women should occupy. She found Colt in his office, working by lamplight. He looked up when she knocked. "Mabel, something wrong?" "No, I just—" She hesitated. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you really not care what people say about how I look? Colt set down his pen. He was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I care," he said finally. "Not because I agree with them, but because I know it hurts you, and I don't like seeing my people hurt." "Your people? You work for me. That makes you my responsibility." He leaned back in his chair. "But if you're asking whether I think they're right, no. I think the world has some stupid ideas about what women should look like and how they should act. And I think people who judge a woman's worth by her waistline are fools." "You're in the minority. I know. Doesn't make me wrong." Mabel felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for basic decency." He picked up his pen again. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's Monday. And the men are already complaining that they're out of that apple pie you made." Mabel smiled despite herself. "I'll make another one." "Good. I liked that pie." She left him to his work and went back to her room. Through the thin walls, she could hear the ranch settling in for the night. Horses in the barn, wind in the eaves, the distant sound of men talking in the bunkhouse. She'd been here a week, 1 week. And already this place felt more like home than Philadelphia ever had. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe this was a good place for starting over. Maybe, just maybe, she could build something here that nobody could take away. The second week at Iron Creek brought the kind of cold that made your bones ache. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the buckets overnight, and the men wrapped rags around their faces before heading out to the fields. Mabel learned to start the stove an hour earlier just to get the kitchen warm enough to work in. She also learned that the ranch operated on a delicate balance of pride, routine, and unspoken rules that nobody bothered to explain until you broke them. On Monday morning, she made the mistake of rearranging the coat hooks by the door, organizing them by size instead of the apparently sacred order the men had established over years. The resulting chaos, men grabbing the wrong coats, accusations flying about who took whose gloves, taught her that some disorder was intentional. "Leave the hooks alone," Bill Hutchins told her gently. "I know it looks messy, but every man knows his spot. Change it and you'll have 15 confused cowboys on your hands." Even though half of them grabbed the wrong coat anyway, Bill grinned. By Tuesday, Mabel had established herself enough that the men started actually talking to her instead of just grunting thanks for the food. Tommy Reed was the friendliest, always willing to explain ranch operations, always quick to help carry heavy pots or haul water. He reminded her of a younger brother, if she'd ever had one. "You settling in all right?" he asked one afternoon, catching her in the yard between lunch and dinner prep. "I think so. Still learning." "You're doing better than all right. The men have stopped complaining about the food. That's practically a miracle." "They complained about the food?" Tommy's face went red. "I mean, not now. They did before, with the other cooks. But you're good. Real good." Mabel couldn't help but smile at his awkwardness. "Thank you, Tommy. And the office work, too. Colt says you found all kinds of problems in the books." "A few discrepancies. More than a few from what I heard. Mitchell was mad as hell when Colt confronted him." "Was he?" "Whole town's talking about it. Mitchell tried to make it seem like Colt was just being difficult, but too many people know Mitchell's been overcharging for years. He just finally got caught." Tommy lowered his voice. "My pa says you're the smartest thing that's happened to this ranch in a decade." "Your father works here?" "No, ma'am. He's got a small spread about 10 miles north, but everyone knows everyone's business out here, and right now, everyone's business is talking about you." Mabel's stomach tightened. "Talking about me how?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Just talking, new person in town. People are curious." Tommy: "All right, some of it's not so nice. The ladies in town mostly. Mrs. Bellamy and her friends." He looked miserable having to tell her. "They're saying things about how Colt must be desperate to hire someone like you. And there's talk about why you came all the way from Philadelphia, people making up stories." "What kind of stories?" "Doesn't matter. It's all nonsense anyway." But it did matter. Mabel could feel it already, the weight of gossip, the way stories could spread and harden into accepted truth. By the time spring came, half the territory would probably believe she was a criminal, or a madwoman, or worse. "Thanks for telling me," she said quietly. Tommy looked like he wanted to say more, but one of the other hands called for him from the barn. He tipped his hat and jogged off, leaving Mabel standing alone in the cold yard. That evening, as she was cleaning up after dinner, Colt appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You got a minute?" "Of course." He gestured toward his office. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him down the hall. Once inside, he closed the door and pointed to a chair. "Sit." She sat. Colt leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "I heard some things in town today. Figured you should know what you're up against." "Tommy already told me people are talking." "Tommy told you the polite version. I'm going to tell you the truth." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "The town women have decided you're either a fallen woman, a con artist, or both. They're spreading rumors that you came west to trap a man into marriage, that you're going to try to seduce me or one of the ranch hands and force a wedding." Heat flooded Mabel's face. "That's ridiculous." "I know, but ridiculous doesn't mean harmless. These women have power in this town. Their husbands run the businesses, the bank, the church. If they decide you're not respectable, they can make your life difficult." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know it's not your fault. And I want you to know I don't care what they say. You have a job here as long as you want it. Nobody in town gets a say in who I hire." Mabel looked down at her hands. "It's because of how I look." "It's because they're bored and cruel and looking for someone to tear down." Colt's voice was hard. "You're different. You're an outsider, and you're making their husbands question why they've been tolerating Mitchell's prices for years. That makes you dangerous." I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause anything. You just exposed problems that were already there. He moved around his desk, sat down heavily in his chair. Listen, the frontier has its own kind of hierarchy. It's not like back east with your proper families and social registers. Out here, it's about who has power and who doesn't. And right now, women like Mrs. Bellamy and her friends have power because they control the social life of this town. Who gets invited to parties? Whose daughters are suitable for their sons? That kind of thing. And I'm not suitable. You're not playing their game. That scares them. Mabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, back in Philadelphia, there was a woman, Mrs. Hartford. She ran all the charity committees and ladies' auxiliary meetings. She decided I was a bad influence because I was too outspoken at a church social. After that, I couldn't get work anywhere. Doors that had been open just closed. Nobody would tell me why, but I knew. What did you do? I stopped caring about being suitable. I took whatever work I could find. Bookkeeping for a shipping company, managing accounts for a small restaurant. It wasn't respectable work for a woman, but it paid. And I got good at it. And then the fiancé happened. Mabel's throat tightened. And then Richard happened. He was a clerk at the shipping company. Nice enough. Attentive. He said he didn't care what Mrs. Hartford or anyone else thought. He said I was special. He wasn't nice? No. He was a liar and a thief. But he was a good liar. I believed him when he said he loved me. I believed him when he said we'd get married and move somewhere new, start fresh. I even believed him when he borrowed money in my name, telling me it was for our future. And then he left. 2 days before the wedding, his friends convinced him he could do better. They laughed about it, about how desperate I must have been to think someone like him would actually marry someone like me. Colt's expression was unreadable. And the debts? He'd put my name on everything. I didn't even know until the creditors showed up. I had to sell everything I owned just to keep from being arrested. And even then, it wasn't enough. So I ran. To here. To the only place far enough away that the creditors couldn't follow. To the only job offer that didn't require references from respectable Philadelphia families. She met his eyes. I'm a good worker, Colt. I swear I am. But I understand if this changes things. If you need to let me go to protect the ranch's reputation. Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I was 17 when I killed my first man. Mabel blinked. What? He was a cattle rustler, tried to steal from my father's herd. I caught him in the act. He drew on me. I was faster. Colt's voice was emotionless, reciting facts. My father told me it was self-defense, that I did the right thing, that out here, you protect what's yours or you lose everything. I don't understand. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that everyone out here is running from something or trying to prove something. My father died when I was 23, left me this ranch and a lot of debts. I spent the next decade fighting to keep it, fighting rustlers, fighting bad weather, fighting my own stupidity when it came to money and management. I've made more mistakes than I can count. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark ranch. 3 years ago, I had a younger brother, Danny. He was 21, reckless, cocky. Thought he knew everything. He got into a dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights. I told him to let it go, to let the courts handle it. But Danny didn't listen. He rode over there with 2 of our hands and tried to settle it himself. What happened? The other rancher shot him, killed him, and both of our men. Claimed self-defense. Said Danny drew first. Maybe he did. I don't know. The court ruled in the other rancher's favor. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was Danny's fault. And it was my fault for not controlling him better. For not teaching him that some fights aren't worth fighting. Colt turned back to face her. After Danny died, I shut down. Stopped caring about anything except keeping this ranch running. Stopped talking to people unless I had to. Got a reputation for being cold. Dangerous. The kind of man people cross the street to avoid. You're not cold. I'm not warm either. I'm just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Tired of pretending I know what I'm doing. He sat back down at his desk. My point is, I don't care about your past. I don't care what the town women say. I care that you show up every morning and do good work. That's all. Mabel felt something shift in her chest. Not quite trust, but close. Thank you. Stop thanking me. I'm not being charitable. I'm being practical. You're the best cook this ranch has had in 5 years. You found problems in my books that could have bankrupted me. Losing you because of some gossip would be the stupidest business decision I could make. Still nothing. Now get some rest. Tomorrow I need you to help me understand these feed contracts, and I have a feeling it's going to give me a headache." Wednesday brought the first real test of Mabel's authority. She was in the pantry taking inventory when she heard raised voices from the kitchen. She came out to find two ranch hands arguing over the last piece of cornbread from breakfast. "I got here first," one of them, Jackson, the one who'd made comments her first day, was saying. "You already had 2 pieces," the other shot back. "Some of us are still hungry." "Then you should have gotten here earlier." "Boys," Mabel's voice cut through the argument, "that's enough." They both turned to look at her. Jackson's expression was challenging. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when you're fighting in my kitchen." "Your kitchen?" Jackson laughed. "You've been here 2 weeks. Don't get ahead of yourself." The other hand, young kid named Pete, looked uncomfortable. "Come on, Jackson, don't be like that." "I'm just saying, she's the cook, not the boss." Mabel kept her voice level. "You're right. I'm not the boss. Colt is. And Colt's rules say no fighting in the house. You want to argue about cornbread, take it outside." Jackson took a step toward her. He was trying to intimidate her, she realized, trying to see if she'd back down. "Or what? Or I stop making cornbread. See how popular that makes you with the other men." Pete laughed nervously. Jackson's face went red. For a moment, Mabel thought he might actually push the confrontation. But then Bill Hutchins appeared in the doorway. "Jackson, Pete, don't you two have fence to mend?" "Yes, sir," Pete said quickly. Jackson glared at Mabel for another second, then stalked out. Bill waited until they were gone, then turned to Mabel. "You handled that well." "Did I? I just threatened to withhold baked goods. Sometimes that's all the authority you need. These men respect strength. You showed strength. I showed stubbornness. Out here, that's the same thing." But the incident rattled her. That night, as she was preparing dinner, she found herself watching the men more carefully, noticing the dynamics, who deferred to whom, who resented taking orders, who was looking for an excuse to cause trouble. Colt noticed her distraction. "Something on your mind?" She told him about the cornbread incident. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Jackson's always been a problem. Good worker, but he doesn't like authority, especially from women." "Should I have handled it differently?" "No, you did fine, but I'll talk to him, make sure he understands the rules." "That might make it worse. Make him think I ran to you like a child." Colt considered this. "You're probably right. All right, you handle it your way. But if he crosses a line, if he threatens you or makes you feel unsafe, you tell me immediately. I won't tolerate that." He wasn't threatening, just testing. Testing is how threatening starts. Keep your guard up. Thursday morning, Mabel woke up to find a dead rat on the doorstep of her room. It had been placed carefully, deliberately. A message. She stared at it for a long moment, her stomach churning. Then she got a shovel from the barn, disposed of the rat, and scrubbed the doorstep clean before anyone else saw. She told herself it was nothing. A prank. Kids from town, maybe. Or just bad luck. But she knew better. At breakfast, Jackson was smirking. He didn't say anything. Didn't have to. His expression said it all. Mabel served him the same portions as everyone else, smiled politely when he grunted thanks, and made a mental note to check all the food storage for signs of tampering. After breakfast, Tommy found her in the pantry. "You all right? You seem upset." "I'm fine." "You sure? Because Jackson's been running his mouth about putting you in your place, and I just want to make sure—" "It's handled, Tommy." "But if he's bothering you, Tommy—" She turned to face him fully. "I appreciate your concern, but I can take care of myself. I've dealt with worse than Jackson." "I know you can. I just don't think you should have to." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. She'd gotten so used to fighting alone that having someone in her corner felt strange, disorienting. "Thank you," she said softly. "Really, but I need to handle this myself. If I go running for help every time someone's mean to me, I'll never earn their respect." Tommy didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "All right, but if you change your mind, I'm here." That afternoon, Mabel spent 2 hours in Colt's office going over feed contracts. The work was tedious but necessary, comparing prices, checking delivery dates, looking for discrepancies. This one, she said, pointing to a contract from 6 months ago. You paid for 3 tons of hay. The delivery receipt only shows 2 tons. Colt leaned over to look. That's a mistake. Is it? Or is it theft? Could be either. Could be sloppy record keeping on the supplier's part. Could be someone at the ranch pocketing the difference. Colt's jaw tightened. You think someone here is stealing from me? I think the numbers don't add up. Whether it's incompetence or malice, I can't say yet, but I'm going to find out. How? By checking everything. Every delivery, every payment, every receipt. If someone's stealing, they've left a trail. I just need to find it. Colt studied her for a moment. You're enjoying this. Enjoying what? The investigation, the puzzle of it. Mabel thought about that. I suppose I am. It's like putting together something broken, finding the pieces that don't fit, making them fit again. You're good at it. Better than I am at dealing with people. I don't know, you handled Jackson pretty well this morning. So he'd heard about that. Of course he had. Nothing stayed secret on a ranch this size. I threatened him with carbohydrate withdrawal. I'm not sure that counts as handling him. It counts. The men respect food more than they respect most people. Despite everything, Mabel smiled. That's a depressing commentary on human nature. Welcome to the frontier. Friday brought a surprise visitor. Mabel was rolling out pie dough when Mrs. Chen came into the kitchen, her expression sour. You have a guest. A guest? Woman from town, Mrs. Bellamy. She's in the front room. Insisted on waiting for you. Mabel's stomach dropped. Did she say what she wants? To talk to you. That's all she said. Mrs. Chen's voice was disapproving. I don't like that woman. She's trouble. Should I tell her I'm busy? You could, or you could face her now and get it over with. Mabel wiped her hands on her apron and followed Mrs. Chen to the front room. Mrs. Bellamy was exactly what Mabel expected. Mid-40s, dressed expensively, the kind of woman who'd never missed a meal or worried about money. She stood by the window examining the room with an expression that suggested she found it wanting. Miss Whitaker. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. How kind of you to see me. Mrs. Bellamy, what can I do for you? Or, I came to welcome you to Red Hollow properly. I know you've been here a few weeks now, and I realized we haven't had a chance to meet. That was a lie, and they both knew it. Mrs. Bellamy had been standing outside the general store the day Mabel arrived. She'd laughed. That's very kind, Mabel said carefully. Would you like some tea? No, thank you. I won't take much of your time. I'm sure you're very busy. Mrs. Bellamy sat down without being invited, arranging her skirts carefully. I wanted to talk to you about your position here at Iron Creek. What about it? Well, it's just that there's been some talk in town about you and Mr. Mercer, and people are concerned. Concerned about what? Your reputation, dear? You're a young woman living here with a group of men. It's not proper. People are starting to wonder about your intentions. Mabel felt ice form in her chest. My intentions are to do my job, that's all. Of course. I'm sure that's true, but you must understand how it looks. A woman of your circumstances, coming all the way from Philadelphia. No family, no references that anyone can verify. Mr. Mercer verified my references. Did he? Or did he simply take your word because he was desperate for help? Mrs. Bellamy's smile sharpened. I'm not judging, you understand. I'm simply trying to help you navigate the social complexities of our community. By questioning my character? By warning you that people are watching, and if you're not careful, you could find yourself in a very uncomfortable position. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice. Mrs. Bellamy stood, smoothing her skirts. Red Hollow is a small town, Miss Whitaker. Reputations matter. And once you lose yours, it's very difficult to get it back. I'd hate to see you make choices that you'd later regret. She walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. There's a church social next Saturday. You're welcome to attend, of course. Though I should warn you, some of the ladies have expressed concerns about having you there. They worry about the example it sets for their daughters. The example of a woman working an honest job? The example of a woman who doesn't know her place. Mrs. Bellamy's voice was cold now. The pretense of kindness dropped. Good day, Miss Whitaker. She left. leaving Mabel standing alone in the front room, shaking with anger and humiliation. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. That woman is poison. She's powerful. Powerful women can still be poison. Don't let her get to you. But it was too late. Mrs. Bellamy had already gotten to her. That night, Mabel couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. "You don't know your place." The words echoed in her head. How many times had she heard variations of that? From Mrs. Hartford back in Philadelphia, from Richard's friends, from every person who'd ever looked at her and decided she was too much or not enough or just wrong somehow. She'd thought that coming west would be different, that the frontier, wild and rough and supposedly built on individual merit, would judge her differently. But people were people, no matter where you went, and they all had the same stupid ideas about what women should be. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone moving quietly, trying not to wake anyone. She sat up, listening. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Mabel's heart hammered. She'd locked the door. She always locked the door, but fear crawled up her spine anyway. A soft knock. "Mabel?" Colt's voice barely above a whisper. "You awake?" She got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and cracked the door open. Colt stood in the darkened hallway, still fully dressed. "Sorry, I saw your light was on. Thought you might be having trouble sleeping." "I am. You?" "Can't stop thinking about those feed contracts. Something's not sitting right." He hesitated. "Can I come in? I know it's late, but it's not proper," Mabel said, echoing Mrs. Bellamy's words. Colt's expression darkened. "Someone said something to you." "Mrs. Bellamy paid me a visit." "That explains it. What did she say?" Mabel opened the door wider. "Come in. If people are going to talk anyway, we might as well deserve it." She expected him to argue, to insist on propriety, but Colt just stepped inside. She left the door open. That was a small concession to decency, and sat on the bed. He took the single chair. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him everything Mrs. Bellamy had said, about reputations and intentions and knowing your place. When she finished, Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Bellamy is married to the bank president. Her son is engaged to the daughter of the largest ranch owner in the county. She thinks that gives her the right to run everyone else's lives." "Does it?" "Only if you let it." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Listen to me, Mabel. I don't care what Mrs. Bellamy thinks. I don't care what anyone in that town thinks. You work for me. You answer to me, not to them. But if they turn people against the ranch, let them try. Iron Creek survived a range war. It survived the winter of '82. It'll survive some gossip from bored ranch wives." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple." He stood up. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're riding out to check on the North Herd. I want you to come with me." "Why?" "Because you need to understand how this ranch operates if you're going to keep the books properly. And because I think getting out of this house for a few hours will do you good." After he left, Mabel did sleep. Not well, but better than she had before. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Mabel put on her warmest dress, which still wasn't warm enough, and met Colt by the barn. Tommy was there, saddling horses. He looked surprised when he saw her. "Miss Mabel's coming with us." "She is," Colt said. "You can ride, right?" Mabel looked at the horse, a large mare with suspicious eyes. "I can ride. I'm not good at it, but I can stay in the saddle." "Good enough." Tommy helped her mount, which was both mortifying and necessary. The horse shifted under her weight, and for a horrible moment, Mabel thought she'd fall. But the mare settled, and Tommy handed her the reins. "Her name's Daisy. She's old and lazy, perfect for beginners." "Daisy and I are going to get along just fine," Mabel said, hoping it was true. They rode out across the snow-covered ranch, Colt in the lead, Tommy and Mabel following. The morning sun turned everything gold and white. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. "The North Herd is about 3 miles out," Colt called back. "We check on them twice a week during winter, make sure they have access to water, count heads, look for signs of illness or injury." "How many head?" "About 200 right now. We lost 30 last winter to the cold and wolves." "Can't you bring them closer to the ranch?" "Not enough grazing near the main buildings." And we don't have the facilities to keep that many cattle penned up all winter. They need open range. It took an hour to reach the herd. The cattle were clustered near a frozen creek, dark shapes against white snow. Several raised their heads as the riders approached, but most ignored them. Colt dismounted and began walking among the animals, checking each one. Tommy did the same on the other side. Mabel stayed on her horse, watching, learning. That one there? Colt pointed to a cow standing apart from the others. See how she's favoring her right foreleg? That's probably an injury. We'll need to bring her in. Have a closer look. How do you bring her in? Rope her, lead her back. Tommy's good with a rope. They spent 2 hours with the herd, counting, checking, making mental notes. It was cold, tedious work, but Mabel could see the care in it. These animals represented the ranch's entire livelihood. Lose too many, and the ranch failed. On the ride back, Colt rode alongside her. What did you think? I think I understand why you're so worried about feed costs. Those cattle eat a lot. They do, and when the grass is buried under snow, we have to supplement with hay and grain. The costs add up fast. Are you making a profit? Some years. Bad winters like last year, we barely break even. Good years, we make enough to cover the bad years. It's not a business for people who want to get rich. Then why do it? Colt was quiet for a moment. Because it's what I know. It's what my father knew, and his father before him. And because when it works, when the calves are healthy and the weather cooperates and you bring a herd to market, there's no better feeling in the world. Mabel looked out across the ranch. From up here on the rise, she could see the whole spread. The buildings, the fields, the distant mountains. It was harsh and beautiful and completely unforgiving. I think I understand, she said. When they got back, there was a wagon in the yard. A fancy one, with brass fittings and paint that looked new. That's Boone's wagon, Tommy said, his voice uneasy. Who's Boone? Mabel asked. Colt's expression had gone hard. Trouble. Silas Boon was the kind of man who announced his presence before he opened his mouth. Tall, well-dressed in a way that made everyone else look shabby, with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He stood on the porch of the main house, talking with Bill Hutchins, and when he saw Colt riding up, that smile widened. Mercer, good to see you. Colt dismounted, handed his reins to Tommy. Boone, what brings you out here? Business. What else? Boone's eyes flicked to Mabel, still sitting on her horse, then back to Colt. Though I see you're keeping interesting company these days. Miss Whitaker is my cook and bookkeeper. Colt's voice was flat, warning. Is she now? I'd heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. Boone's gaze traveled over Mabel again, appraising. Philadelphia, isn't it? Long way to come for a job cooking beans. Mr. Boone. Mabel's voice was steady, though her hands were tight on the reins. A pleasure. The pleasure is mine, I assure you. Boone turned back to Colt. Can we talk? In private? Tommy helped Mabel down from the horse. Her legs were shaking, partly from the cold, partly from the ride, partly from the way Boone had looked at her, like she was something to be evaluated and priced. Go inside, Colt told her quietly. Get warm. She wanted to argue, to insist she could handle whatever Boone had to say, but the look on Colt's face stopped her. This wasn't about protecting her feelings. This was about ranch business, and she was still an outsider to that world. Inside, Mrs. Chen was waiting by the window, watching the men on the porch. That man is a snake, she said without preamble. Boone? He's a cattle broker. Buys from small ranchers, sells to the big buyers back east, takes a percentage on every transaction. Most brokers take 10, maybe 15%. Boone takes whatever he can get away with. How does he get away with it? Because he's smart. He offers loans to struggling ranchers, helps them get through bad winters. Then when they can't pay him back, he renegotiates their contracts. Before they know it, they're working for him instead of themselves. Mabel moved to the window, looked out at the porch. Colt's expression was hard, closed off. Boone was talking, gesturing broadly. Bill Hutchins stood to the side, his hand resting casually near his gun. Has Colt borrowed from him? Not yet, but Boone's been circling for years, especially after Danny died. He knows this ranch is struggling. He's just waiting for Colt to get desperate enough. And if Colt does borrow from him? Mrs. Chen's expression was grim. Then Iron Creek stops being Colt's ranch and starts being Boone's property. He'll own it in everything but name. The conversation on the porch stretched on. Finally, Boon shook Colt's hand. Colt looked like he'd rather be shaking hands with a rattlesnake, and climbed into his fancy wagon. He drove off, leaving dust settling in the cold air. Colt came inside a few minutes later. His face was like stone. "What did he want?" Bill asked. "To buy the North herd. Said he had a buyer lined up in Chicago, offered premium prices." "That's good, isn't it?" Mabel said. "It would be, if I believed him." Colt pulled off his coat, hung it up. "Boone doesn't offer premium prices unless he's getting something out of it. Either the buyer's paying more than he's telling me, or there's some catch I'm not seeing yet." "So you said no?" "I said I'd think about it, which he knows means no." Colt rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "He also made me an offer on the ranch itself. Said he has investors interested in buying Wyoming properties. Said he could get me a good price." The room went quiet. "You're not selling," Bill said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not selling, but the fact that he's asking means he thinks I'm weak enough to consider it." "Are you?" Mabel asked quietly. Colt looked at her. 3 months ago, maybe. Before you found all those problems with the books. Before you started making this place run like it should. Now?" He shook his head. "Now, I'm just angry. Angry that Boone thinks he can waltz in here and take what my family built." "Then we make sure he can't," Mabel said. "We?" "You hired me to help save this ranch. That's what I intend to do." Something shifted in Colt's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "All right then, let's get to work." The next week, Mabel dove into the ranch's financial records with a single-minded intensity that even Mrs. Chen found alarming. "You need to sleep," the older woman said, finding Mabel in the office well past midnight. "I need to understand where the money's going. There's something here, something I'm missing." "It'll still be there in the morning." "Will it?" Mabel looked up, her eyes red from squinting at ledgers by lamplight. "Because every day I don't find it, Boone gets closer to owning this place, and I won't let that happen." Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment. "You care about this ranch." "I care about the people who depend on it. Colt, you, Tommy, Bill, all the hands who'd be out of work if Boone took over." Mabel turned back to the ledger. "And I care about proving that I can do this job. That coming here wasn't a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake. Tell that to Mrs. Bellamy and her friends." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. "Those women wouldn't recognize value if it bit them. Don't waste your energy on them." But it was hard not to waste energy on them when they were actively working against her. The next Sunday, Mabel made the mistake of going into town for church. She'd avoided it the previous weeks, but Mrs. Chen had convinced her that hiding would only make the gossip worse. The look started the moment she walked through the church doors. Women turning to whisper, men pretending not to notice. The only empty pew was in the very back, naturally. Mabel sat alone through the entire service, feeling every eye on her. After, when people gathered outside to socialize, she tried to slip away unnoticed. "Miss Whitaker," Mrs. Bellamy's voice stopped her. "How kind of you to join us." Mabel turned. Mrs. Bellamy stood with 3 other women, all dressed in their Sunday finest, all looking at Mabel like she was something unpleasant they'd stepped in. Mrs. Bellamy. "Ladies, this is the woman I was telling you about, the one staying out at Iron Creek." The way she said staying made it sound scandalous. "With all those men," one of the other women said, her voice dripping with false concern. "It must be so difficult for you." "I'm working," Mabel said evenly, "same as anyone else with a job." "Of course, dear. We're not judging, we're just concerned about your reputation." "My reputation is fine." "Is it, though?" Mrs. Bellamy's smile sharpened. "Because I heard the most interesting story the other day, from a friend back east, about a woman in Philadelphia who left town rather suddenly, after her fiancé abandoned her. Something about debts?" The world tilted, Mabel's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? How strange. Because this woman, Miss Whitaker was her name too, what a coincidence, apparently tried to trap a man into marriage to pay off her creditors. When that failed, she ran west. I wonder if that story sounds familiar to you." The other women were watching avidly, hungry for scandal. "My past is my business," Mabel managed, "not when it affects our community. We have daughters to protect, standards to maintain. We can't have women of questionable character influencing our young people. I haven't influenced anyone. I've barely left the ranch. Yet. But you're clearly setting your sights on Mr. Mercer, aren't you? A wealthy rancher, no family to interfere, vulnerable after his brother's death. He'd be an easy target for a woman like you. I'm not. Of course you are. Why else would you come all this way? Why else would you accept a position that puts you in such close proximity to an eligible man? Mrs. Bellamy's voice was sweet poison. Don't worry, dear. We understand desperation. We just can't allow it to succeed. Mabel wanted to defend herself, to explain, to make them understand. But the words wouldn't come. All she could see were their faces, smug, satisfied, convinced of their own righteousness. She turned and walked it away, their laughter following her down the street. She made it back to the ranch before the tears came. She went straight to her room, locked the door, and cried into her pillow like a child. All the anger and humiliation and fear she'd been holding back poured out. A soft knock interrupted her breakdown. "Go away," she called. "It's me." Colt's voice. "Let me in." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. I can hear you crying through the door." Mabel wiped her face, took a shaky breath, and opened the door. Colt stood in the hallway, his expression concerned. "What happened?" She told him. All of it. Mrs. Bellamy's accusations. The story about Philadelphia. The implication that Mabel was trying to trap him into marriage. When she finished, Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Pack a bag." "What?" "We're going into town. Right now." "Colt, I don't want to. I don't care what you want right now. I care about fixing this before it gets worse." His voice was hard, determined. "Those women think they can destroy you with gossip. They're wrong." 20 minutes later, they were in the wagon heading back to Red Hollow. Mabel had no idea what Colt planned to do, and he wasn't telling her. They stopped in front of the church. Sunday services were over, but people were still milling around, socializing. The conversations died when Colt jumped down from the wagon. "Mrs. Bellamy," he called, his voice carried across the churchyard. "A word." Mrs. Bellamy turned, her expression shifting from surprise to calculation. "Mr. Mercer, what can I do for you?" Colt walked up to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The crowd gathered, sensing drama. "You've been spreading stories about Miss Whitaker." "I've simply been sharing information that I thought the community should know." "You've been lying and slandering a woman who's done nothing to deserve it." Mrs. Bellamy's face flushed. "I have not been lying. Everything I said is true." "Is it?" "You said she tried to trap a man into marriage." "That's a lie. Her fiancé was a con artist who stole from her and left her with his debts." "You said she's trying to trap me." "That's a lie. She's an employee doing her job." "You said she's a woman of questionable character." "That's the biggest lie of all." The crowd was dead silent now. Mrs. Bellamy looked around, seeking support, but no one would meet her eyes. "She works for you," Mrs. Bellamy said weakly. "Of course you'd defend her." "I defend her because she deserves defending, because in the month she's been at Iron Creek, she's worked harder than anyone I've ever employed. She saved my ranch from bankruptcy. She's treated my men with more respect than they've probably earned. And she's done it all while dealing with people like you, trying to tear her down for no reason other than cruelty." "Mr. Mercer, I'm not finished." Colt's voice was cold. "You asked if I was considering marriage. The answer is yes. Not because anyone trapped me, not because I'm desperate, but because I've found someone worth considering. And if I decide to propose to Miss Whitaker, it'll be because she's smart, capable, and stronger than half the men in this territory. Not because of what she looks like or where she came from." Mabel's heart stopped. He hadn't said he was going to propose. He'd said if, but the crowd didn't hear the conditional. They heard the declaration. Mrs. Bellamy's face went white, then red. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious, and here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop spreading lies about Miss Whitaker. You're going to tell everyone who'll listen that you were mistaken, that you misjudged her. And if I hear one more word of gossip from you or your friends, I'll make sure every rancher in this county knows exactly how you've been treating honest people trying to make a living." "You're threatening me." "I'm promising you, your husband's bank holds mortgages on half the ranches in Wyoming. But those ranchers can move their business elsewhere if they think the bank president's wife is making their lives difficult. Think about that before you open your mouth again. Colt turned and walked back to the wagon. Mabel, still stunned, followed. They drove away in silence, leaving the crowd buzzing behind them. Halfway back to the ranch, Mabel found her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "You told them you were considering proposing to me." "I said if." "That's a big word." "They didn't hear the if." "I know." Colt kept his eyes on the road. "But I meant what I said about you. You are smart, you are capable, and you do deserve better than what those women were giving you." "But marriage—" "I'm not proposing, Mabel. I barely know you, but I wanted them to understand that you have value, that you're not someone they can just dismiss." Mabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. Stop thanking me for basic decency. I'll stop when you stop providing it." That got a small smile from him, but the damage was done. By Monday morning, the whole territory believed Colt Mercer was courting his cook. The ranch hands treated Mabel differently, more careful, more deferential. Tommy stammered when he talked to her. Even Mrs. Chen seemed amused by the whole situation. "You could do worse," she told Mabel over breakfast. "I'm not doing anything. He's not courting me. He was defending me. He told the whole town he was considering marrying you. That's courting, whether you call it that or not. He said if. Details." Mabel wanted to be angry about the whole situation, but part of her, a small, traitorous part, was touched by what Colt had done. He'd put his own reputation on the line to protect hers. That meant something. The problem was that it also painted a target on her back. 2 days later, Boon showed up again. Mabel was in the kitchen when she heard his voice in the yard. She looked out the window and saw him talking to Colt by the barn. This conversation looked more heated than the last one. After 10 minutes, Boon rode off. Colt came into the house, his expression thunderous. "What did he want?" Bill asked. "To warn me." Colt's voice was bitter. "Said he'd heard about the scene at church. Said I was making a mistake defending Miss Whitaker, that it would hurt the ranch's reputation." "Our reputation?" Mabel said. "Or his plans?" Colt looked at her. "You think he's behind the gossip?" "I think he benefits from you being isolated, from the town turning against you. It makes you more vulnerable, easier to pressure into a bad deal." "That's a serious accusation. It's also logical. Who has the most to gain from destroying your support network?" Bill nodded slowly. "She's right. Boone's been working this territory for years. He knows how to manipulate people, turn them against each other. And if the town thinks you're making bad decisions, courting an unsuitable woman, letting your judgment get clouded, they'll be less likely to support you when Boone makes his move." "What move?" Mabel asked. "Whatever he's planning, Boone doesn't do anything without a plan." That night, Mabel couldn't sleep again. She kept replaying Boone's visits in her mind, trying to see the pattern. He'd offered to buy the North Herd. Then he'd offered to buy the ranch. Now he was trying to isolate Colt socially. What was the endgame? She got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to the office. The ledgers were where she'd left them, pages marked with notes and questions. She started going through them again, looking for something she'd missed, some connection, some proof of what Boone was really after. 3 hours later, she found it. The pattern was subtle. So subtle she'd missed it the first dozen times through. But once she saw it, it was obvious. The missing supplies, the inflated prices, the payroll discrepancies. They didn't point to random theft or incompetence. They pointed to someone deliberately bleeding the ranch dry. Slowly. Steadily. Making sure Iron Creek stayed weak, but not so weak it collapsed entirely. And the timing matched Boone's visits. Every time he came to check on Colt, to make an offer, to express concern, the financial problems got slightly worse. Someone at the ranch was working for Boone. Mabel sat back, her hands shaking. This wasn't just business. This was sabotage, and it had been going on for at least 2 years since before Henry died. She needed to tell Colt, but she also needed proof. Hard proof, not just suspicious patterns. She spent the rest of the night documenting everything, making lists, building a case. By the time the sun rose, she had a file of evidence that was damning, if she was right. At breakfast, she caught Colt's eye and nodded toward the office. He understood. After the men left for the fields, they met there. "What did you find?" he asked. She told him, showed him the patterns, explained her theory. Colt's face went darker with every page. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. "Who?" he said finally. "I don't know yet. Someone with access to the money. Someone who's been here long enough to know how the ranch operates. Bill's been here 20 years, Tommy's family. Mrs. Chen is, I don't think it's any of them, but it's someone close enough to the operations to manipulate things without getting caught." "Jackson," Colt said suddenly. "What?" "Jackson. He's been acting strange for weeks, hostile, testing boundaries, and he's the one who handles supply pickups from town. That would give him access. It would also give him opportunities to skim, to report deliveries that never arrived, to pocket the difference." Colt stood up, paced to the window. "If you're right, if he's working for Boon, then we need to catch him in the act, get proof before we accuse him." "How?" Mabel thought for a moment. "The next supply run is Friday, right?" "Right. Tell Jackson there's been a change. Tell him I need to go with him to verify the orders, that I'm taking over all supply management. He'll refuse. Then we'll know for sure." Colt considered this. "It's risky. If he is working for Boon, you'll be alone with him on the road to town. I'll have you and Tommy following at a distance. He won't try anything if he knows backup is nearby. You sound very confident for someone who's never done anything like this before." "I'm not confident. I'm angry. There's a difference." That got a small smile from him. "All right. We'll try it your way. But if anything goes wrong, I know you'll shoot him and dump the body somewhere dramatic. I was going to say I'd get you out of there safely, but shooting him works too." Friday came too quickly. Mabel, dressed in her plainest clothes, tied her hair back and met Jackson by the wagon. His expression was suspicious. "Boss says you're coming to town with me." "That's right. I need to verify the supply orders in person. I've been doing supply runs for 3 years, never needed verification before." "Well, now you do. Is that going to be a problem?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "No, ma'am." The ride to town was tense. Jackson didn't speak unless Mabel asked him a direct question. She kept her hands in her lap, very aware of the small pistol Colt had insisted she carry. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but the weight of it was reassuring anyway. At Mitchell's store, Jackson jumped down and started loading supplies without waiting for Mabel. She followed him inside, carrying the supply list Colt had given her. Mitchell looked up when she entered. "Miss Whitaker, didn't expect to see you. I'm taking over supply management for the ranch. I'll need to verify this order before it gets loaded." Mitchell's expression shifted slightly. Nervous or just surprised? "Of course. Everything's in the back." Mabel spent the next hour counting. Every sack of flour, every pound of nails, every tool and supply on the list, and she found exactly what she'd expected. The amounts didn't match what had been ordered. "Mr. Mitchell," she said quietly, "this order is short 3 sacks of flour and 2 boxes of nails." "Must be a mistake. Let me check the invoice." "It's not a mistake, and it's not the first time, is it?" Mitchell's face went pale. "How much is Boone paying you?" Mabel continued. "To short the orders? To overcharge? To help him bleed Iron Creek dry?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And you're going to tell me exactly how this scheme works, or I'm going to the sheriff with records showing you've been defrauding multiple ranches for years." Mitchell looked at Jackson, who'd gone very still. "She's bluffing." "I'm not." Mabel pulled out the file of evidence she'd compiled. "I have 2 years of discrepancies documented, patterns that point directly to you and Jackson working together, probably on Boone's orders." "You can't prove anything," Jackson said. "Can I?" "Because I think the sheriff would be very interested in your sudden improvements in living. New boots, new saddle. Where did that money come from, Jackson? Certainly not your ranch wages." Jackson's hand moved toward his gun. Before Mabel could react, the door opened and Colt walked in, his rifle in hand. Tommy was right behind him. "I wouldn't," Colt said quietly. His voice was cold enough to freeze blood. Jackson's hand stopped. "Now," Colt continued, "someone's going to tell me exactly what's been happening here. And depending on how helpful you are, I'll decide whether to shoot you or just turn you over to the sheriff." Mitchell broke first. It was Boone's idea. He said he wanted to make sure the small ranchers stayed weak, easy to buy out when they got desperate. He paid us to skim from the orders, small amounts, nothing anyone would notice right away. How many ranches? Colt asked. 6, maybe 7. I didn't keep track. And Jackson? Jackson delivered the supplies, made sure the ranchers got the short orders, pocketed the difference. We split it with Boone. Colt looked at Jackson. You've worked for me for 3 years. And you paid me shit, Jackson spat. Boone paid better. So you sabotaged the ranch, made sure we stayed weak, made sure I'd be desperate enough to sell to Boone when the time came. It was just business. It was theft and betrayal. Colt's expression was ice. Get out, both of you. Go to the sheriff and confess, or I'll drag you there myself. Either way, you're done. Mitchell and Jackson left, escorted by Tommy. Colt stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. You were right, he said finally. I wish I hadn't been. How many other ranches are in Boone's pocket? How many other people has he destroyed? We'll find out. We'll tell everyone. We'll make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Colt looked at her. You saved the ranch. You know that, right? If you hadn't found the pattern, if you hadn't pushed for proof, we'd have lost everything. We haven't won yet. Boone's still out there, and he's not going to be happy when he finds out his plan failed. Let him be unhappy. I'm done being afraid of him. But Mabel wasn't done being afraid, because she knew men like Boone didn't give up easily, and they didn't forgive people who got in their way. She was right to be afraid. 3 days later, Iron Creek Ranch caught fire. It started just after midnight. Mabel woke to the sound of horses screaming. For a confused moment, she lay in bed, half asleep, thinking she'd imagined it. Then she smelled smoke. She threw off her blankets and ran to the window. Orange light flickered from the direction of the barns. Flames were already climbing the walls of the horse stable, reaching toward the roof. Fire! She screamed, yanking open her door. Fire in the barn! The house erupted into chaos. Men stumbled from their rooms, pulling on boots, grabbing coats. Colt appeared in the hallway, already fully dressed, moving with the kind of speed that suggested he'd been awake when it started. Everyone out, he ordered. Tommy, Bill, get the horses. Pete, round up whoever's in the bunkhouse. We need every man on this. They poured into the yard. The fire was worse than it had looked from the window. The entire stable was engulfed, flames shooting 20 feet into the air. The horses inside were going mad with terror. The water pump, Bill yelled. We need to get the pump working. It's frozen, someone shouted back. Hasn't worked since last week. Then break the ice on the trough. Form a bucket line. Move. Mabel ran toward the well, but Colt caught her arm. Stay back. This is too dangerous. The horses are dying, and you'll die trying to save them if you go in there. But Tommy and 2 other hands were already forcing open the stable doors. Smoke poured out, thick and black. The horses bolted through the opening, wild-eyed, some of them with singed manes and burned flanks. Men tried to catch them, to lead them away from the flames, but the animals were beyond reason. One of the hands went down, trampled. Another dragged him clear. Mabel grabbed a bucket, joined the line forming from the trough to the stable. The water was icy, biting through her thin nightgown, but she didn't feel it. She just passed bucket after bucket, watching them thrown uselessly onto flames that were already consuming the building. Then someone screamed, "The feed barn!" Mabel turned. Sparks from the stable had jumped to the feed storage barn 30 yards away. Flames were already licking at the dry hay stacked inside. If that goes, we lose the winter feed, Bill said, his voice tight with panic. The whole herd will starve. Then we don't let it go, Colt said. He turned to the assembled men. Half of you stay on the stable. It's already lost, but keep the flames from spreading. The rest, with me. We saved the feed barn. The night dissolved into smoke and chaos and exhaustion. Mabel lost track of time. She just kept moving, passing buckets, hauling water, coughing from the smoke that filled her lungs. Her hands went numb, her shoulders screamed. Her nightgown was soaked and freezing against her skin. Around her, men shouted orders, cursed the flames, worked until they dropped. The stable was a total loss. Nothing left but smoking timber and ash. But they managed to save the feed barn barely by soaking every surface and beating out sparks before they could take hold. Dawn came slowly, revealing the full extent of the damage. The stable was gone. 5 horses had died in the fire. 3 men were injured, 1 with a broken leg, 2 with burns. The yard was a mess of charred wood, scattered tools, and exhausted cowboys sitting wherever they'd collapsed. Mabel found Colt near the remains of the stable, staring at the wreckage. His face was black with soot, his eyes red from smoke. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad. Those horses represented a year's worth of work. Training, breeding, all gone." His voice was flat, emotionless. The voice of a man who'd been hit too many times to react anymore. Could it have been an accident? No. He pointed to a corner of the wreckage. Even from a distance, Mabel could see what he was showing her, burn patterns that started in multiple places, not from a single source. This was set deliberately. Someone wanted to destroy us. Boon. Has to be. Revenge for exposing his scheme, or maybe he figured if he couldn't buy the ranch, he'd burn it down. Can you prove it? No. And even if I could, what then? Boon's too well connected, too powerful. He'd claim innocence, and I'd look like a desperate man making wild accusations. Mabel wanted to argue, to insist they could fight this, but looking at the devastation around them, she wasn't sure they could. This wasn't just a setback. This was a killing blow. Mrs. Chen appeared with coffee and blankets. "Everyone inside, you need food and rest." "We need to assess the damage," Colt said. "You need to not collapse, which is what you're about to do. Inside." "That's an order." They stumbled into the house. The kitchen table filled with soot-covered, exhausted men. Mabel helped Mrs. Chen serve coffee and whatever food they could pull together on short notice. Nobody spoke much. They were too tired for words. Finally, Bill broke the silence. "What are we going to do?" "Rebuild," Colt said automatically. "With what money? The insurance payment won't cover half the losses, and without those horses, we can't work the spring roundup properly. We'll have to hire extra hands or rent horses from other ranches, which we can't afford." "Then we figure something out." "Colt." Bill's voice was gentle. "Maybe it's time to consider Boone's offer. Sell while you still can. Get something out of this before it all falls apart." The room went silent. Everyone was looking at Colt, waiting to see how he'd respond. He didn't answer. He just stood up and walked out. Mabel found him 20 minutes later, sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. "They're right, you know," he said without looking at her. "This ranch is dying. Has been for years, maybe longer, and I've just been too stubborn to admit it." "You're not giving up." "Why not? What's the point of fighting when every time I win, something else catches fire?" He finally turned to face her. "I've lost my brother, lost half my herd, lost my stable. At what point do I admit that maybe the universe is trying to tell me something?" "The universe isn't telling you anything. Boone is. And if you quit now, he wins." "He's already won, Mabel. This was the final move. He knew exactly how to break me." "Then we break him back." "How? With what? We don't have proof. We don't have resources. We barely have a functioning ranch anymore." Mabel sat down beside him on the steps. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were blistered from the bucket handles. She smelled like smoke and sweat and failure. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know that men like Boone count on people giving up. They count on being too powerful, too connected, too scary to fight. And maybe they're right. Maybe we can't win." "That's a terrible motivational speech." "I'm not finished. Maybe we can't win, but we can make sure he pays for what he did. We can make enough noise that other ranchers know what he is, that they stop doing business with him, that his reputation gets destroyed the way he tried to destroy yours." "You want revenge." "I want justice. There's a difference." Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You could leave, you know. Get out before this all collapses. I'd understand." "Where would I go? Back to Philadelphia? To the creditors and the gossip and Mrs. Hartford? Back to being the fat girl everyone feels sorry for?" She shook her head. "I'd rather burn down with this ranch than go back to that. That's the spirit. We'll fail together." "We're not going to fail. You sound very certain for someone who has no plan." "I'm not certain. I'm just too tired to quit." She stood up, offering him her hand. "Come on, we need to feed the men and figure out what we're salvaging and what we're writing off as loss." He took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. His grip was warm, solid, reassuring in a way she hadn't expected. The next week was brutal. They worked from before dawn until after dark, clearing wreckage, taking stock of what was left, trying to hold the ranch together with willpower and stubbornness. The financial situation was even worse than Bill had predicted. The insurance payment would cover maybe a third of the losses. They'd need to borrow money to rebuild, and every bank Colt approached turned him down. Too much risk, the bank president told him, Mr. Bellamy, husband of Mabel's tormentor. Your ranch has been struggling for years. Now this fire, it's not a good investment. The fire wasn't my fault. Perhaps not, but it happened, and that makes you a liability. You're punishing me because of my association with Miss Whitaker, Colt said quietly. Because my defense of her embarrassed your wife. I'm making a sound business decision. If you'd like to reapply in 6 months after you've demonstrated stability, in 6 months I'll be bankrupt. Bellamy spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. Then perhaps you should consider selling to someone with better resources. I'm sure Mr. Boon would still be interested in purchasing your property. Colt walked out before he did something he'd regret. Mabel was waiting in the wagon. She took one look at his face and knew. They said no. They said Boon's probably already bought them off, just like he bought off Mitchell and Jackson and who knows how many others. He climbed onto the wagon seat. We're done, Mabel. Without capital to rebuild, we can't operate. And without operating, we default on existing loans. The bank will foreclose. Boon will buy the property for pennies on the dollar. It's over. There has to be another way. If there is, I can't see it. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Mabel's mind raced, trying to find a solution, an angle, anything that could save them. But every path led to the same conclusion. They were out of options. That night, she couldn't sleep. Again. She got up, wrapped herself in a shawl, and went to the office. The ledgers were there, as always. Proof of how carefully she'd documented everything, how much good it had done them. She was flipping through pages, not really looking at them, when something caught her eye. A notation she'd made weeks ago and forgotten about. A delivery receipt from 2 years ago, signed by someone named Carson. Carson. She'd seen that name recently. Where? She pulled out another ledger, the one with the property records and legal documents Colt had shown her when explaining the ranch's history. There. Carson. Jacob Carson. Listed as a previous owner before Colt's father bought the property. No, not an owner. A lien holder. The ranch had been used as collateral for a loan to Carson 30 years ago. The loan had been repaid, the lien released. Standard business. Except, Mabel pulled out more documents tracing the chain of ownership back. The lien had been filed with the territorial office. It should have been formally removed when the debt was paid, but according to the territorial records, which Colt had gotten copies of during a dispute with a neighbor, the lien had never been formally released. It was still technically active, even though the debt had been paid decades ago. That shouldn't matter. The debt was paid. Everyone knew it was paid, but it was an irregularity in the official records. A loose thread. And loose threads could be pulled. Mabel worked through the night, reconstructing the ownership history, documenting every transfer, every payment, every legal filing. By dawn, she had a file that showed a clear problem with the ranch's title. It wasn't a real problem. The lien was satisfied, the debt paid. But on paper, technically, legally, there was an unresolved claim on the property, which meant the property couldn't be sold without first clearing that claim, which meant Boon couldn't take possession even if the bank foreclosed. Mabel sat back, her heart pounding. This could work. It wouldn't save the ranch, but it would buy them time. And time was what they needed most. She waited until breakfast to present her findings to Colt. He listened, his expression growing more focused with every word. You're saying the title is clouded. Technically, not really, but legally enough that it would have to be cleared before any sale could go through. How long would that take? Months. Maybe longer if the original lien holder's estate needs to be tracked down to formally release the claim. And if they can't be found, it goes to probate, which could take years. So if the bank forecloses, the property goes into legal limbo. Boon can't buy it. Nobody can buy it until the title is cleared. And while it's in limbo, you maintain possession. That's brilliant. Bill, who'd been listening, leaned forward. That gives us time to rebuild, to get another harvest in, to prove we're viable. It also pisses off every creditor we have, Colt pointed out. They'll know we're playing legal games to delay the inevitable. Maybe. But what choice do we have? Mabel met his eyes. This doesn't solve our problems. It just gives us time to solve them ourselves.
But isn't that better than giving up? Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. You know what? Yes, it's better. And I'm really starting to enjoy making Boon's life difficult.
They filed the title claim that afternoon, formally raising the issue of the unreleased lien. The territorial office confirmed that yes, technically, the lien was still on record, and yes, it would need to be resolved before any clear title could be transferred. The bank was furious. Mr. Bellamy called it a stalling tactic and threatened legal action. Mabel pointed out that they were simply following proper legal procedure and ensuring all claims on the property were properly documented. If the bank wanted to foreclose on a property with a clouded title, that was their prerogative, but any future buyer would face the same issue. Bellamy slammed down the papers and told them they were digging their own graves. Maybe, Colt said pleasantly, but we'll do it on our own timeline, not yours. Word spread quickly. By the next day, half the territory knew about Iron Creek's legal maneuvering. Opinions were divided. Some people called it clever. Others called it desperate. A few called it outright fraud, which it wasn't, but facts rarely mattered when gossip was involved. And then something unexpected happened. 3 ranchers showed up at Iron Creek on the same day, not to gloat or offer sympathy, to offer help. Heard about your trouble with Boon, the first one said. His name was Harris, and he ran a spread about 20 miles north. We've all dealt with him. Most of us didn't figure out what he was doing until it was too late. But you fought back, and we respect that. What are you offering? Colt asked. Horses. I've got 3 good working horses I can lend you through spring roundup. You can return them when you rebuild your stable. The second rancher, a grizzled man named Cooper, offered hay. My winter stores are better than expected. I can spare 2 tons. Won't solve all your problems, but it'll keep your herd fed for a few more weeks. The third, a younger man named Sullivan, offered labor. I've got 2 hands who are sitting idle until spring. They can work your ranch until you're back on your feet. No charge. Colt looked stunned. Why would you do this? Because Boone's been bleeding all of us for years, Harris said. We just didn't know it. You and Miss Whitaker exposed him. That takes guts. And around here we remember who stands up when it matters. After they left, Colt just stood in the yard staring at nothing. You all right? Mabel asked. I don't know. I've spent so long thinking I had to do everything alone, that asking for help was weakness. And then people just show up, offering things I didn't even ask for. That's what community means. I've never had much of a community. You do now. Over the next week, more help arrived. A local carpenter offered to help rebuild the stable at cost. A woman from town, not Mrs. Bellamy, someone younger, braver, brought food and medical supplies for the injured ranch hands. Even Tommy's father rode over with extra tools and timber. It wasn't enough to completely solve their problems. They were still facing massive debts and an uncertain future. But it was enough to keep fighting. And fight they did. Mabel reorganized the entire ranch operation, cutting every unnecessary expense, renegotiating contracts, finding efficiencies in places nobody had thought to look. She worked 18-hour days, fell into bed exhausted, and woke up to do it again. Colt and the men rebuilt. Not just the stable, but systems and processes that had been broken for years. They fixed fences, repaired equipment, prepared for spring roundup with a level of organization the ranch hadn't seen in a decade. And slowly, painfully, Iron Creek started to stabilize. It was during this period that Mabel realized something had shifted between her and Colt. They spent hours together every day, planning, working, arguing over decisions. The arguments were the best part. He challenged her assumptions. She pushed back on his stubbornness. And somewhere in those battles of will, they'd become partners. Not romantic partners. Not yet. But partners in the truest sense. 2 people working toward the same goal, trusting each other to carry their weight. One evening, after a particularly long day of negotiations with a supplier, Colt found her in the kitchen. She was making bread, her thinking activity, the repetitive motion that helped her mind work through problems. You should rest, he said. So should you. I will. Eventually. He pulled up a chair, sat down. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret coming here? Mabel paused in her kneading. Why would you ask that? Because you've worked harder than anyone should have to work. You've been attacked, gossiped about, nearly burned alive. You've dealt with more stress in 2 months than most people face in a year. And for what? A failing ranch and a boss who doesn't pay you enough? You're not my boss anymore. What am I then? She thought about that. My friend, my partner, the person I trust more than anyone else I've ever known. Colt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't deserve that trust. Yes, you do. I've made so many mistakes, Mabel, with this ranch, with my brother, with my life. I'm not the hero you seem to think I am. I don't think you're a hero. I think you're a stubborn man who refuses to quit, even when quitting would be easier. That's different than being a hero. It's better. How is it better? Because heroes are myths, but stubborn men who keep fighting, those are real. And real is what I need. Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Then he stood up, moved around the table, and did something that surprised both of them. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't romantic in the storybook sense. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like smoke and coffee and exhaustion. When he pulled back, he looked almost surprised. I shouldn't have done that. Why not? Because you work for me. Because the whole town already thinks I'm taking advantage of you. Because this is exactly what Mrs. Bellamy accused us of. I don't care what Mrs. Bellamy thinks. Do you? No? But I care what you think, and I don't want you to feel pressured or— Mabel kissed him back. Harder, just to shut him up. When they broke apart, she said, I'm not pressured. I'm not manipulated. I'm not confused about what I want. Are you? No, He ran a hand through his hair. I'm trying to do the right thing here. The right thing is to be honest, so I'll be honest first. I've spent my entire life being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't pretty enough, thin enough, proper enough. And I started believing it. Started thinking that the best I could hope for was someone who'd settle for me. She took his hand. But you don't make me feel like I'm being settled for. You make me feel like I'm worth fighting for. Like my brain and my work and my stubborn refusal to quit matter more than what I look like. And that's everything I never knew I needed. Colt's grip on her hand tightened. You are worth fighting for. You're worth everything. Then stop apologizing for kissing me and do it again. He did, and this time neither of them pulled away. Later, much later, they sat together on the porch steps, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The ranch was quiet. The stars were bright overhead. Everything smelled like wood smoke and possibility. We're still going to fail, Colt said. You know that, right? This legal maneuver buys us time, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. We don't have enough capital to fully rebuild. I know. And even if we survive this, there'll be another crisis. Another drought, or fire, or market crash. That's ranching. It's always one disaster away from collapse. I know that too. So why stay? Why not take whatever money you've saved and go somewhere easier, somewhere you don't have to fight so hard just to survive? Mabel leaned her head against his shoulder. Because fighting hard is what makes it worth surviving. Because easy doesn't build anything that lasts. And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being your ranch and started being ours. Ours, he repeated, testing the word. I like that. Good, because you're stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mabel said, We need to do something about Boon. What can we do? We've exposed his scheme, but he's still free. Still powerful, still dangerous. I know, but men like him don't stop until someone makes them stop. And if we don't make him stop, he'll just do this to someone else. What did you have in mind? Mabel smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Tell me anyway. So she did. And he was right. He didn't like it. But by the time she finished explaining, he was smiling too. That's either brilliant or completely insane, he said. Can it be both? With you? Always. Mabel's plan was simple in concept, dangerous in execution. They were going to force Boon into a public confrontation at the one place he couldn't refuse to appear, the Territorial Cattlemen's Association meeting. Every spring, ranchers from across Wyoming gathered to discuss prices, coordinate roundups, and settle disputes. It was the closest thing the territory had to formal governance for the cattle industry. And Boon, who made his living as a broker between ranchers and eastern buyers, never missed it. His reputation depended on being seen as an integral part of the community. We present everything we found, Mabel explained to Colt and Bill the night before the meeting. The evidence of price fixing, Mitchell and Jackson's confessions, the pattern of sabotage across multiple ranches, we make it public. We make it undeniable. And if Boon denies it, Bill asked, then we have Harris, Cooper, and Sullivan testify that they've experienced the same problems. We show that this isn't one disgruntled rancher making accusations. It's a pattern. He'll have lawyers, Colt said. He'll claim we're lying, that we're trying to destroy him because we failed. Probably. But we'll have documentation. Numbers don't lie even when people do. You really think this will work? Mabel met his eyes. I think it's our only shot. We can't fight him with money. We can't fight him with lawyers. But we can fight him with the truth in front of everyone he's ever done business with. If even half of them believe us, his reputation is destroyed. And without his reputation, he's nothing. The night before they left for the territorial meeting in Cheyenne, Mabel couldn't sleep. She kept going over the presentation in her head, checking for weaknesses, places where Boon could attack their argument. She'd never spoken in front of a large group before, never had to defend her work to people who were looking for reasons to dismiss her. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. She found Colt already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too much on my mind. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. Second thoughts? About tomorrow? No. About what comes after? Yes. He stared into his cup. If this works, if we actually expose Boon and survive this, what then? We still have debts. We still lost the stable. We're still one bad winter away from losing everything. Then we keep fighting, same as we have been. For how long? Another year? 5 years? 10? At what point do we admit that maybe this life is too hard? It's always going to be hard. That doesn't mean it's not worth it. You sound very certain. I'm not certain about anything, but I know that 3 months ago I had nothing. No money, no prospects, no hope. Just debts and shame and the certainty that I'd never be good enough for anything. She reached across the table, took his hand. Now I have work that matters. People who depend on me. A partner who sees me as an equal. That's worth fighting for, even if the fight never ends. Colt's grip tightened on her hand. When this is over, assuming we survive, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. You're going to propose. He looked startled. How did you know? Because I know you. You're not the kind of man who does anything halfway, and I'm not the kind of woman who needs time to think about her answer. What's your answer? Ask me properly first, after we've dealt with Boon, after we've saved the ranch. Then I'll tell you. That's not fair. Life's not fair. You should know that by now. Despite everything, he smiled. You're going to be difficult for the rest of my life, aren't you? Count on it. They left for Cheyenne the next morning, Mabel, Colt, Bill, and Tommy. The territorial meeting was being held in the largest hotel in the city, a grand building that made Red Hollow's general store look like a shack. Mabel had never been anywhere so fancy. She felt acutely aware of her plain dress, her work-worn hands, the way she didn't quite fit into spaces designed for refined people. Stop it, Colt said quietly as they entered the building. Stop what? Whatever you're thinking about yourself right now, stop it. You belong here as much as anyone. I'm the only woman here who isn't serving drinks. You're the only person here who's smart enough to see through Boon's schemes. That's what matters. The meeting room was already filling with ranchers, men in their best clothes, talking business and politics. Mabel saw Harris, Cooper, and Sullivan across the room. They nodded in her direction, moral support at least. And there, near the front, was Boon, surrounded by other brokers and buyers, laughing, confident, completely at ease. He saw Colt and Mabel enter, and his expression shifted slightly. Not worried, just aware. The meeting was called to order by the association president, a man named Thornton who owned the largest ranch in the southern part of the territory. He went through the usual business, price reports, updates on the railroad expansion, concerns about rustlers and predators. Then he said, "Does anyone have new business to raise?" Colt stood up. "I do." The room went quiet. Everyone knew about the fire at Iron Creek. Everyone knew about Colt's conflict with Boon. This was going to be interesting. The floor recognizes Colt Mercer of Iron Creek Ranch. Colt moved to the front of the room. Mabel followed, carrying the file of documentation they'd prepared. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She could feel the judgment, the curiosity, the suspicion. "Gentlemen," Colt began, "I'm here to talk about a problem that affects all of us. Fraud, theft, systematic sabotage designed to weaken small ranchers and force them into selling at below-market prices." Murmurs rippled through the room. Boone's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. "Over the past 3 months, my bookkeeper, Miss Whitaker, discovered discrepancies in my ranch accounts. Overcharges for supplies, shorted deliveries, missing inventory. At first we thought it was simple incompetence, but the more we investigated, the more we realized it was deliberate." Mabel stepped forward, opened the file. "I have documentation of systematic fraud going back 2 years. Mitchell's General Store in Red Hollow was overcharging Mr. Mercer for supplies while shorting deliveries. One of Mr. Mercer's own ranch hands, Jackson, was helping facilitate the theft. Together, they stole approximately $3,000 over 24 months. "That's a serious accusation," Thornton said. "Do you have proof?" "Written confessions from both Mitchell and Jackson. Delivery receipts showing what was ordered versus what was actually received. Financial records showing the pattern of theft." She handed papers to Thornton. "It's all documented." "This is unfortunate," Thornton said, reviewing the documents. "But it sounds like a local problem. Mitchell and Jackson are criminals. They should be prosecuted. Why bring it to this association?" "Because they weren't working alone," Colt said. "They were working for Silas Boon." The room erupted. Boon stood up, his face red. "That's a lie. I had nothing to do with any of this." "Didn't you?" Mabel's voice cut through the noise. "Mitchell and Jackson both testified that you paid them to skim from deliveries, that you wanted to keep certain ranches weak so you could buy them out when they got desperate. And Mr. Mercer isn't the only victim." She nodded to Harris, who stood up. "I've experienced the same problems. Overcharges from suppliers, shorted deliveries, all while Boone kept offering to help with loans and buyout offers." Cooper stood next. "Same here. Lost 200 head last winter because the feed I paid for never arrived. Boone offered to buy my ranch for half what it was worth." Sullivan rose. "I'm younger than most of you, just took over my father's spread. Boone tried to convince me I couldn't handle it. Offered a loan with terms that would have made him a partner. When I refused, suddenly my contracts with buyers started falling through." More ranchers were standing now, some angry, some nodding in recognition. The room was chaos. Boone's voice rang out over the noise. "This is absurd. You're listening to a bunch of failed ranchers looking for someone to blame for their own incompetence. Where's your proof I was involved?" "Here." Mabel held up more papers. "Bank records showing payments from your accounts to Mitchell and Jackson. Dates that correspond exactly with the periods of theft. Letters in your handwriting discussing arrangements with suppliers. And testimony from 3 other brokers who say you bragged about your system for acquiring properties below market value. Those are forgeries, lies from people trying to destroy me." "Then explain the fire at Iron Creek Ranch," Colt said quietly. "Explain how my stable burned down 3 days after I exposed Mitchell and Jackson. Explain the burn patterns that show it was deliberately set in multiple locations." "I had nothing to do with that fire. I was in Cheyenne when it happened." "Were you?" "Because I have a witness who saw someone matching your description near my ranch the day before the fire, talking to a man who then rode toward Iron Creek." "That was a bluff. They had no such witness." "But Boone didn't know that." His face went pale, then red. "You're lying." "Maybe, but the territorial marshal can sort that out during his investigation." Colt turned to address the room. "Gentlemen, I'm not asking you to take my word for this. I'm asking you to look at the evidence, to talk to each other, to compare notes and see if you've experienced similar problems. And if you have, if even one other person here has been victimized by Boone's schemes, then we need to act." "Act how?" someone called out. "By banning him from this association, by refusing to do business with him, by making it clear that we won't tolerate fraud and sabotage in our industry." Thornton held up his hand for silence. "This is a serious matter. Mr. Boone, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Boone stood there, surrounded by staring faces, his confidence finally cracking. "This is a witch hunt. These people are trying to ruin me because their own businesses failed." "My business didn't fail," Colt said. "It was sabotaged. There's a difference. And mine is thriving now that I'm not being robbed blind," Harris added. The room erupted into discussion again. Ranchers were comparing notes, raising hands to share their own experiences with Boone. The stories were remarkably similar: loans with bad terms, buyout offers during crises, mysterious problems with suppliers and contracts. Boon tried to defend himself, but his words were drowned out by the growing anger in the room. He'd built his empire on manipulation and intimidation, counting on isolated ranchers not talking to each other, not sharing information. But Mabel had forced them together, made them compare notes, shown them the pattern, and patterns were impossible to deny. After an hour of testimony and debate, Thornton called for a vote. All in favor of banning Silas Boon from the Territorial Cattlemen's Association and recommending an investigation by the Territorial Marshal? Every hand in the room went up, including some of Boone's former allies. Motion passes unanimously. Thornton looked at Boone. "You're done. Get out." Boone's face was twisted with rage. He looked at Colt, then at Mabel. "You think you've won? You've destroyed my reputation based on lies and manipulation. I'll sue you for slander. I'll make sure you lose everything." "You can try," Mabel said calmly, "but I have documentation of every claim we made. You're welcome to test it in court." Boone stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping, then another. Then the whole room was applauding. Colt pulled Mabel close, whispered in her ear, "You did it. You actually did it. We did it. No, this was you, your investigation, your presentation, your courage to stand up in front of everyone and fight." He kissed her forehead. "You saved us." After the meeting, they were surrounded by ranchers wanting to thank them, to share their own stories, to offer support. It was overwhelming and exhausting and wonderful. Harris grabbed Colt's hand, shook it firmly. "You've done us all a service. Boone's been a poison in this territory for years. We should have dealt with him sooner." "Better late than never," Colt said. "And Miss Whitaker," Harris turned to Mabel, "I have to admit, when I first heard about you, I believed the gossip. I thought you were just, well, I was wrong. You're one of the sharpest minds in this territory. If you ever need work, I'd hire you in a heartbeat." "Thank you, but I'm happy where I am." "I don't doubt it." He glanced at Colt. "You planning to make this official?" "Soon," Colt said. "Very soon." They stayed in Cheyenne for 2 more days, meeting with other ranchers, building alliances, establishing contacts. The territorial marshal opened an investigation into Boone's activities. Several ranchers filed complaints. The bank that had refused Colt's loan suddenly became very interested in working with him, now that his reputation was restored. The ride back to Iron Creek felt different, lighter, like they'd been carrying a weight they didn't fully recognize until it was gone. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked as they crested the ridge overlooking the ranch. "How much has changed? 3 months ago, I stepped off a stagecoach into a town that hated me on sight. I had nothing but debts and shame and a job I wasn't sure I could do. And now? Now I have a home, a purpose. People who respect me for my work, not despite my appearance. That's more than I ever thought possible. You did that yourself. Nobody gave it to you. You gave me a chance. That's all I needed." They rode down into the valley. The ranch looked better than it had in weeks. The new stable was taking shape. The men were busy with repairs. Smoke rose from the main house chimney. It looked like a place that would survive. Mrs. Chen met them at the door. "How did it go?" "We won," Mabel said simply. "I never doubted you would." The older woman smiled. "There's stew on the stove. You both look half-starved." That evening, after dinner, after the men had been told about the meeting and celebrated with whiskey and terrible singing, Colt found Mabel on the porch. "Walk with me?" They walked out past the corrals toward the ridge where they'd first looked at the ranch together months ago. The stars were bright overhead. The air smelled like spring, still cold, but with a promise of warmth to come. "I have something to ask you," Colt said when they stopped. "I know, and you already know your answer." "I do. But I'm going to ask properly anyway." He took both her hands, held them carefully. "Mabel Whitaker, you're the smartest, most stubborn, most infuriating person I've ever met. You saved my ranch. You saved my life in ways I'm still figuring out. And somewhere in the middle of all that fighting and working and arguing, I fell in love with you. That's very romantic for a man who barely talks. I'm not finished. I don't have much to offer you. This ranch is still struggling. The work is still hard. There will be more fires and droughts and disasters. I can't promise you an easy life or a comfortable one. I know, keep going. But I can promise you a partnership, someone who sees you as an equal, someone who values your mind and your work and your stubborn refusal to quit, someone who will fight beside you for as long as we both live. He took a breath. Will you marry me? Mabel pretended to think about it. Will I get to keep managing the ranch finances? Obviously. And you won't complain when I reorganize your office? I'll complain, but I'll let you do it anyway. And we're equals? In everything? No, the husband decides nonsense? We're equals. In everything. Even when we disagree. Especially when we disagree. Then yes, I'll marry you. Well, he kissed her, and it was different from the desperate kisses they'd shared before. This was a promise. A beginning. The start of something neither of them fully understood, but both of them were willing to build. When they broke apart, Mabel said, "We should probably tell people." Probably, though I suspect they already know. Mrs. Chen definitely knows. Mrs. Chen knows everything. They walked back to the house hand in hand. Inside, they found the ranch hands gathered in the kitchen, clearly waiting for them. Mrs. Chen was smiling. "Well?" Bill asked. "We're getting married," Colt announced. The room erupted in cheers. Someone produced more whiskey. Tommy was grinning so hard his face must have hurt. Even the men who'd been skeptical of Mabel at first were raising glasses in celebration. "To Mabel and Colt," Bill said, "may they be as successful at marriage as they are at destroying corrupt cattle brokers." "That's a terrible toast," Colt said. "It's honest. That's what matters." They celebrated late into the night. Mabel found herself surrounded by people who'd become family, not by blood, but by choice and circumstance and shared struggle. It was the first time in her life she'd felt truly accepted. Not tolerated, not pitied. Accepted. The wedding was simple, held at the ranch on a Saturday in May. They invited the whole territory. Half of them came, not just out of curiosity, but out of genuine respect. Even some of the town women who'd gossiped about Mabel came, offering stiff but sincere apologies for their earlier behavior. Mrs. Bellamy didn't come. Neither did her husband. But 3 months later, they would hear that Bellamy's bank had lost several major accounts to a competitor. Apparently, ranchers had long memories when it came to who'd supported them and who hadn't. The ceremony was performed by a traveling judge who happened to be passing through. Mabel wore a new dress, not fancy, but clean and well-fitted, made by a seamstress in town who'd offered her services at cost after hearing about the work Mabel had done to expose Boon. Colt wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable in front of a crowd, but he said his vows clearly and meant every word. "I promise to respect you, to value you, to fight beside you, to build something with you that neither of us could build alone, for as long as we both live." Mabel's vows were simpler. "I promise to challenge you, to push you, to never let you settle for less than we're capable of, and to love you even when you're being impossible." "I'm not impossible." "You absolutely are. That's why we work." The judge pronounced them married, and Colt kissed her in front of everyone, not caring who was watching or what they thought. The party lasted all day and into the night. The ranch hands had decorated the yard with lanterns and wildflowers. Mrs. Chen had prepared enough food to feed an army. Musicians from town played fiddle and guitar. People danced and laughed and celebrated not just a wedding, but a victory over forces that had tried to destroy them. Later, much later, after the last guests had left and the ranch was quiet again, Mabel and Colt stood on the porch, watching the stars. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked. "The marriage or the ranch?" "Both. I think we'll fight like hell to make sure they do, and that's the best promise anyone can make." "That's very practical for a wedding night." "You knew what you were getting when you married a rancher." "I did, and I wouldn't change a thing." The years that followed weren't easy. There were droughts, there were harsh winters, there were cattle diseases and market crashes and all the disasters that came with frontier ranching. But Iron Creek survived. More than survived. It grew. Mabel's management transformed the ranch from a struggling operation into one of the most efficient in the territory. She implemented systems for tracking inventory, managing expenses, and maximizing profits that other ranchers started copying. Within 5 years, Iron Creek was profitable. Within 10, it was prosperous. But their real success wasn't measured in cattle or dollars. It was measured in the community they built. Iron Creek became known as a place where people could get a second chance, where your past didn't matter as much as your willingness to work, where women could do jobs they'd never been allowed to do back east, and nobody questioned their capability. Mabel hired female bookkeepers for other ranches, training women who'd been told they weren't suited for numbers. She worked with the territorial government to establish better regulations for brokers and suppliers, making sure what happened with Boone couldn't happen again. She became one of the most respected business minds in Wyoming, not despite being a woman, but because her gender was simply irrelevant to her competence. As for Boone, the investigation revealed the full extent of his schemes. He'd defrauded dozens of ranchers across 3 territories. The lawsuits ruined him financially. He left Wyoming a broken man, his reputation destroyed, his empire collapsed. Some people felt sorry for him. Mabel wasn't one of them. She'd learned that mercy had to be balanced with justice, and Boone had earned every consequence he faced. Colt never became a warm, talkative man, but he became a respected one. Other ranchers sought his advice. Young cowboys wanted to work for him because Iron Creek had a reputation for treating employees fairly, and he was known throughout the territory as the man who'd married the smartest woman in Wyoming and was smart enough to know it. They had 3 children over the years, 2 daughters and a son. All of them grew up learning that hard work mattered more than appearance, that stubbornness could be a virtue, that the only limits on what they could do were the ones they accepted. Their eldest daughter, Sarah, took over the ranch bookkeeping at 16 and eventually expanded it into a full accounting firm. Their younger daughter, Catherine, became a teacher, educating ranch children throughout the territory. Their son, Daniel, studied law and became an advocate for fair business practices in the cattle industry. When people asked Mabel about her success, and they did, especially as she got older and her story became something of a legend, she always gave the same answer. I didn't succeed because I was special. I succeeded because I was stubborn, and because one person gave me a chance when everyone else had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. And what would you say to young women facing similar situations? A newspaper reporter asked her once, during an interview for a piece about successful frontier women. Mabel thought about that question for a long time before answering. I'd say that the world will always have people who judge you by your appearance, by your gender, by circumstances you can't control, and you can't stop them from judging. But you can choose not to accept their judgment as truth. That sounds difficult. It is difficult. It's exhausting. Some days it feels impossible, but the alternative is accepting a life that's smaller than you deserve. And I wasn't willing to do that. Any regrets? Plenty. I wish I'd stood up for myself sooner. I wish I'd trusted my own judgment instead of constantly second-guessing myself. I wish I'd understood earlier that being difficult wasn't a character flaw. It was the only way to survive in a world that wanted me to be something I wasn't. What advice would you give your younger self? That strength doesn't always look the way you expect. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just show up and do the work, even when everyone's waiting for you to fail. And that finding people who see your value isn't about being perfect. It's about being stubborn enough to keep looking until you find them. On a cold evening in 1912, 28 years after Mabel first arrived at Iron Creek Ranch, she and Colt sat on the porch where they'd spent so many evenings over the years. They were both in their 50s now. Colt's hair was completely gray. Mabel's hands were rough from decades of work. But they were still partners in every sense that mattered. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Colt asked. "After you proposed. You were nervous." "I was terrified. I thought you might say no." "I was never going to say no. I just wanted to make you sweat a little." "You succeeded." He took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. "I've been thinking about that winter, about how close we came to losing everything. We didn't lose. That's what matters. We didn't lose because of you, because you saw problems nobody else saw, because you fought when it would have been easier to quit. We fought together. No, you led. I just followed." Mabel squeezed his hand. "That's not true, and you know it. We made each other stronger. That was the point." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ranch settle in for the night. The operation was much larger now. They ran 3,000 head of cattle, employed 40 ranch hands, owned property in 3 counties. But the core of it was the same: hard work, honest dealing, a refusal to quit when things got difficult. "Do you think we'll be remembered?" Colt asked. "When we're gone, does it matter?" "I don't know.
Maybe not. But I like the idea of people telling our story, of young women hearing about the heavy girl from Philadelphia who came west and built an empire, of them believing they can do the same thing. It wasn't just me, it was us. It started with you. I was ready to sell, ready to give up. You're the one who insisted we keep fighting, because I had nothing to lose. You gave me that, the freedom to take risks because I'd already lost everything that mattered back east. And what did you gain? Mabel looked out at the ranch, their ranch, built through decades of work and struggle and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She thought about her children and grandchildren, about the women she'd trained who now ran their own businesses, about the legacy they'd built together. Everything, she said finally. I gained everything I never knew I wanted. Years later, after both Mabel and Colt had passed, people still told their story. The details changed with each retelling, the way stories do. Some versions made them heroes, some made them legends. Some focused on the romance, others on the business success. But every version agreed on the core truth, that a woman everyone underestimated and a man everyone feared had built something remarkable together, that they'd faced down corruption and gossip and fire and disaster, that they'd refused to let the world define what they were capable of, and most importantly, that their strength hadn't come from being perfect. It came from being stubborn, from refusing to quit, from finding someone who saw their value and building something together that neither could have built alone. The ranch still stood, generations later. Iron Creek was now one of the largest operations in Wyoming, owned and operated by Mabel and Colt's descendants. And in the main office, hanging on the wall, was a small plaque with words Mabel had written near the end of her life. We were told we were too much or not enough, too difficult or too broken or too different to succeed. We were told to accept our limitations, to know our place, to settle for less than we deserved. We chose differently, not because we were brave, but because we were too stubborn to accept a life smaller than the one we could build. And that stubbornness, that refusal to quit, was the only superpower we ever needed. That was the real story of Mabel and Colt. Not a fairy tale about beauty or transformation. Not a romance about perfect people finding perfect love, but a story about two broken, stubborn, imperfect people who chose each other and chose to fight. Who built something lasting not despite their flaws, but because they refused to let those flaws define them. It was a story about how strength doesn't always look the way the world expects. About how the people everyone underestimates are often the ones who change everything. About how the best partnerships aren't between perfect people, but between people who make each other braver. And it was a story that, more than a century later, people still told their daughters, still used as proof that you don't have to fit the world's narrow definition of acceptable to build a life worth living. You just have to be stubborn enough to try.